welcome all. We are at the June 5th meeting of the Freedom Hub Working Group. It's going to be a pretty interesting day today again, and I want to welcome our guests as well as everyone visiting today. We're still waiting for some people to arrive and for the one of the couple of the guests to be able to get online here, so we'll start without them a little bit. While we're filling a little time, I just want to show you real quick that this is the link you would use to share this webinar series with others. And also, if they just register, let's say they can't make this time slot with regularity because they always have something going on, just by registering, they're going to get a reminder every week of what's coming up for the forthcoming Wednesday, as well as a link to the last Monday. And also then there's the link for our channel. So we've got a couple places, but we're trying to help promote Brighteon a little bit, frankly. So we have a channel up on that site. Here it is, you can see it up in the URL again. And all of the videos from the various webinars we've done are in here so far, and you get a chance to review some of these too. There's been some really fantastic ones, though, for those that couldn't catch them at the time. And we'll periodically review them in the list of videos that when I give out that Monday blast, we'll say, here's some greatest hits, give you a chance to take a look at some of those old ones. Charles, are you there?
Still triaging, Jeff, for Heidi.
Okay, no problem. Well, we're waiting to get a couple of guests on, like I said, so we can sort of get a few things underway here. Now, we're going to start today with John, and let me bring up his little bio here, and then we're going to let him talk for a little bit, and then we'll bring in some of the guests. And here's this government accountability project, and this was part of his whistleblower activity and so on, and it's been pretty interesting to see, you know, what happens to people that are trying to do the right thing, and he's going to be a good representative of that. He's won some different awards and so on here. I'm not going to take the time to go through this whole bio here as I've got it up on the screen, but John, you might want to give us a little rundown on yourself initially, and then we'll start to go from there. And I'm going to give you the camera here too at this point also. So here we go. So this way you can put some stuff on your screen if you'd like as well.
Okay, thanks.
All right, and you just accept it and off you go.
Okay, and there I am.
All right, so we're looking at your desktop as the image part. So go right ahead. Please give us a little bit of a bio that you'd like to provide, and then let's hear what you've got to lay on us today.
You bet. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure. I enjoy these events, and I'm very happy to do one myself. So my name is John Kiriakou. I'm a former CIA counterterrorism officer and former chief investigator on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. I spent 15 years at the CIA. The first half of my career was in analysis. The second half was in counterterrorism operations. That's a long story that I'm going to make very short. I switched from analysis to counterterrorism in 1997 because I was bored writing papers that I knew nobody would ever read, and I wanted to do something exciting. I'm a linguist. I spoke both Arabic and Greek, and I wanted to do something that that I felt was more of a serious contribution to the national security. And so just as I felt like I knew what I was doing in counterterrorism, 9/11 hit, and I was named chief of counterterrorism operations for the CIA in Pakistan. So I went to Islamabad to take up that position, which I was thrilled to do. I'd been there for several months when we began the hunt for Abu Zubaydah, who we believed at the time was the number 3 in Al-Qaeda. That turned out to not exactly be correct. He was certainly a bad man. He was a facilitator and a logistician for Al-Qaeda. He had created and managed Al-Qaeda's 2 training camps in southern Afghanistan. He had founded Al-Qaeda's safe house in Peshawar, Pakistan, called the House of Martyrs. So he was a bad guy. It took us about 6 weeks, and we finally tracked him down. And on the night of March 22nd, 2002, we effected 14 simultaneous raids on 14 separate Al-Qaeda safe houses. And sure enough, he was in one of them, and we captured him. He was shot while trying to escape. I know that sounds very, very Nazi-like, but a Pakistani policeman shot him as he was jumping from the roof of his house to the roof of the neighboring house to try to get away. He was shot in the thigh, the groin, and the stomach, and was nearly killed. He nearly bled to death that very night. We rushed him first to a hospital in Faisalabad, Pakistan, and then airlifted him to a Pakistani military base nearby, outside the city of Lahore. I sat with him in that hospital room for 56 consecutive hours. I never left his side. Those were my orders. My orders were twofold. One, to take him alive, which we did barely. And the other was to sit with him and not leave his side. George Tenet's exact words were 24/7 CIA eyes on. And so I was frankly afraid that I would fall asleep and that he would escape, or somebody would help him escape or something. So I tore up a sheet and I tied him to the bed, arms and legs, arms back here tied to the bedpost, and same with his legs. After about 24 hours, he came to. And I'm telling you this because it's important background when we get into my own situation. He came to, and the first thing he asked me was to kill him. He asked if I would smother him with a pillow. He was crying, and he actually cried a lot in the period that I was with him. But he said, "Please, brother, kill me. Take the pillow and kill me." And I said, "No, nobody's going to kill you, Abu Zubaydah. We've been looking for you for a very long time." And so he was very worried about what was going to happen to him. He asked me repeatedly what was going to happen. And I said, "I frankly don't know. But I'll tell you one thing. I am the nicest guy that you are going to encounter in this experience." I said, "My colleagues are not as nice as I am. So if there's one thing that you do, it's that you have to cooperate." And he said, "You seem like a nice man, but you're the enemy, and I'll never cooperate." I said, "Suit yourself." For the next 24 hours, we talked a lot. And again, he cried a lot. He said he would never know the touch of a woman. He would never know the joy of fatherhood. He would never see his mother again. And I said, "You're not the victim here. There were 50,000 people in those towers. What did you think was going to happen? Did you think we wouldn't try to find you, to kill you, lock you up, to kill bin Laden?" And he said that he didn't want to attack the United States on 9/11. He wanted to attack Israel. He said all he ever wanted to do was to kill Jews. But he had been overruled, that bin Laden had made up his mind that it was going to be the United States on 9/11, with the idea that he wanted to crash our economy. That was what bin Laden had told him. In the middle of the night, on that third night, an unmarked CIA private jet flew in and landed. He asked me to hold his hand, so I did, and 3 FBI agents and I carried him out on a gurney to this airplane. We maneuvered him onto the plane and we laid him across the luggage rack at the back. I tied him down to the luggage rack and I leaned over and I said, "Remember, you have to cooperate." And he squeezed my hand. The plane took off. I never saw him again. So a couple of months later, I returned to CIA headquarters. And I had been home 2 or 3 days. I was in the cafeteria at lunchtime, and a senior officer from the CIA's Counterterrorism Center approached me and said, very casually, he said, "Oh, hey, I'm glad I ran into you. I wanted to ask you, do you want to be certified in the use of enhanced interrogation techniques?" I had never heard that term before. So this was May, late May, early June of 2002. I said, "What's that mean, enhanced interrogation techniques?" And excitedly, he said, "We're going to start to get rough with these guys." And I said, "Ooh, what's that mean?" And so he explained these 10 techniques to me. I said, "I don't know, man. That sounds like a torture program. Torture's illegal." And he said, No, it's not a torture program. We got it approved by the Justice Department and the White House." I said, "Be that as it may, I'm one of those rare people who's actually read the United Nations Convention Against Torture, and that's a torture program. But I said, you know what, let me think about it for an hour. So I went upstairs to the 7th floor of the CIA. That's the executive level. There was a very senior CIA officer up there for whom I had worked in the Middle East about a decade earlier. And I knocked on his door and I said, I need some advice. They just approached me and asked me if I wanted to be certified in these enhanced interrogation techniques. What do you think of this? And he said, first of all, let's call a spade a spade. He said, it's a torture program. They can use whatever euphemism they want, but this is a torture program, and torture is a slippery slope. And you know how these guys are. Somebody's going to go overboard in an interrogation and they're going to kill a prisoner. And when that happens, there's going to be a congressional investigation and there's going to be a Justice Department investigation and somebody's going to be arrested and jailed. He said, do you want to go to jail? I said, no, I don't want to go to jail. As it turned out, I was the only person who went to jail. But I said, no, I don't want to go to jail. I went back down to the Counterterrorism Center. I said, this is a torture program. I'm not interested. Count me out. Now, ironically, promotion panel met just a couple of days later. Now here I've just caught the number 3 in Al-Qaeda, and I was passed over for promotion. Friends of mine, our children played together. We would go to dinner together. Our wives were friends. I liked these guys. They were friends. And I realized then that they had a dark side that I just had never really recognized, I guess is the word. So I declined. I was not interested in this torture program. And I went on to be the executive assistant to the deputy director. I had a great career. Early 2004, I resigned and I went into the private sector. Fast forward to December 2007. I've been out of the CIA almost 4 years at this point. And I get a call from Brian Ross at ABC News. Now, Brian's a famous newsman, 14-time Emmy winner, one of the longest serving investigative journalists out there. I didn't know Brian, but he called me and he said that he had a source who told him that I had tortured Abu Zubaydah. I said that was absolutely untrue. I had never laid a hand on Abu Zubaydah or any other prisoner. I said, indeed, I was the only person who was kind to Abu Zubaydah, the only one. I said, your source is either misinformed or he's a liar. And Brian responded, and I had no idea that this was an old reporter's trick, but he said, well, you're welcome to come on the show and defend yourself. I said, I'll think about it. Later in the week, President Bush gave a press conference, and during the course of that press conference, he looked directly into the camera and he said, we do not torture. I said to my wife, who was a senior CIA officer as well, I said, he is a bald-faced liar. He is looking the American people in the eye and he's lying to us. But still, I kept my mouth shut. And then a couple of days after that, the president's on his way to the helicopter on the south lawn of the White House, and a reporter shouts a question to him, and he turns and says, well, if there is torture, it's the result of a rogue CIA officer. And I said to my wife, Brian Ross's source is at the White House, and they're going to pin this on me. And I decided that I could no longer wait for somebody who was actually involved in the torture program by torturing somebody to come forward and go public with his information. I decided I would do it. And I decided in the days leading up to that interview with Brian Ross that no matter what he asked me, I would just tell the truth. A week later, I gave him that interview here in Washington, and I said three things that have utterly changed the course of the rest of my life. I said that the CIA was torturing its prisoners. I said that torture was official US government policy. It was not the result of a rogue, as the president had intimated. And I said that the policy had been personally approved by the president himself. As you can imagine, the FBI began investigating me the very next day. The CIA filed what's called a crimes report, indicating that I had revealed classified information. And from December of 2007 to December of 2008, the FBI investigated me. They determined in December of 2008 that I had not committed a crime, and they closed the case. They sent my lawyers something called a declination letter, declining to prosecute me. My wife and I actually went out to dinner that night. We were so happy. We said, well, this is the end of our year-long nightmare. 3 weeks later, Barack Obama becomes president, and he names John Brennan the Deputy National Security Advisor. John is an old nemesis of mine. I met John in 1989, and we didn't like each other then, and we've never liked each other since. What I did not know was that when Obama became president, John Brennan asked the Justice Department to secretly reopen the case against me. I had no idea that for the next 3 years, until January of 2012, that Robert Mueller had created something called the John Kiriakou Task Force at the FBI. There were a dozen FBI agents on me 24/7. They were intercepting my phone calls. They were intercepting my emails. I had no idea. Finally, in January of 2012, I was arrested and charged with 5 felonies, including 3 counts of espionage coming out of that ABC News interview. Now, espionage is one of the gravest crimes with which an American can be charged, and it frequently carries with it the death penalty. The death penalty. But they were going to go easy on me. And so on the day of my arrest, they offered me a deal. Plead guilty to 1 count of espionage and do 45 years. And one of the FBI agents, a woman, said to me, take the deal, Mr. Kiriakou, and you might live to meet your grandchildren. I said, I am not doing 45 minutes. I haven't done anything wrong. The law is on my side. And I said to her that day, I said, on the day that I took my oath of office, on my first day at the CIA, I put my right hand in the air and I swore to uphold and to protect the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And I said, I will not allow myself to believe that I was the only person in the room that day who actually meant it. I said, I'm not taking your deal. The next week they came back and they offered me 10 years. Take a guilty plea to an espionage charge, do 10 years. I said, forget it. That was a Monday. On Wednesday, they came down to 8, and on Friday, they came down to 5. Now, I had 11 lawyers. The Washington Post called my attorneys legal titans, the most important criminal defense attorneys in Washington. They have represented the likes of John Mitchell during Watergate, and Monica Lewinsky, and Aldrich Ames, and every big name in Washington these guys have represented. One of them said to me, I've been an attorney for 50 years in this city, and I have never seen them come down in time with each offer. Usually when they offer you 10 years and you say no, they come back the next week and they offer you 15 years and then 20 years. But with me, they kept coming down. I said, why are they doing that? And he said, because they have a shit case and they know it's shit. So he said, we're going to trial. You haven't done anything wrong. That was January of 2012. What I didn't know was that the Justice Department uses 2 techniques that are impossible to defend against. One is called charge stacking. Charge stacking is, let's say you may have done something wrong, maybe you didn't. Either way, instead of charging you with a crime, they'll charge you with 5, 10, 20 felonies. They force you to defend yourself until you go bankrupt. And then they come back and they say, okay, we'll dismiss all the charges but one if you take a plea. What are you going to do? You're bankrupt. You can't pay your attorneys. And according to ProPublica, which came out with a report in November of 2012, the federal government wins 98.2% of their cases. So do you roll those dice knowing that you have a 1.8% chance of winning? I said to my lawyers, I said, if I end up going to trial and I'm convicted, realistically, what am I looking at here? And they said 18 to 24 years. Well, that's pretty much a death sentence too. Well, I figured I had nothing to lose. So we continued to go forward in our defense. I actually hired O.J. Simpson's jury consultant, if you can imagine. He happened to be the uncle of my best friend's wife, and so he did it for nothing. And we got him a security clearance. He went through all of the files, and we all sat down, all 11 lawyers with him and me. And he said, listen, the other technique that the Justice Department uses is what's going to do you in. It's called venue shopping. What the prosecution does is they will charge you with a crime in the federal district where they are most likely to get a conviction. So let's say you run into trouble in New York. They don't charge you in New York. They'll charge you in Washington or Alexandria, Virginia, or Atlanta, right? Wherever they think you're going to get a guilty decision and the longest possible sentence, that's where they charge you. Well, they charged me in the Eastern District of Virginia. It's known as the espionage court because no national security defendant has ever won a case there, ever. So I knew what my chances were. My chances were nil. There's also one judge, Judge Leonie Brinkema, who reserves all national security cases for herself. Me, Jeffrey Sterling, Julian Assange, Ed Snowden, Zacharias Moussaoui, John Walker Lind, all of these cases were argued before Judge Leonie Brinkema. I knew I was in trouble from the beginning because we found exculpatory evidence in discovery. Of course, literally every page of my discovery was classified. We received 15,000 pages of discovery. Among the discovery, we found several things that I thought pushed us over the finish line. One was a series of memos between John Brennan and Eric Holder. John Brennan sent a memo to Eric Holder and he said, charge him with espionage. And Holder wrote back and said, my people don't think he committed espionage. And Brennan wrote back and said, charge him anyway and make him defend himself. That was one thing. The other thing was when I was working for the Senate Foreign Relations Committee between 2009 and 2011. I was John Kerry's intelligence advisor in addition to being the senior investigator on the committee. One of the wonderful things about a job on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee is that you get to have lunch with foreign diplomats all the time. And you can talk about all the issues of the day. And foreign affairs, that was my life. And so I loved doing that. One day, I got a call from a Japanese diplomat who invited me to lunch. We go to lunch, and I remember the lunch being delightful. We talked about Israeli elections, Turkish elections, the peace process, terrific lunch. At the end of the lunch, this guy says to me, so what's next for you? And I said, well, actually, I think I'm going to resign soon. I promised Senator Kerry I'd give him 2 years. It's been 2.5. I have 5 kids. I need to make some money and get my kids through college. Very excitedly, this guy says, no, don't do that. If you give me information, I can give you money. And I said to him, what's the matter with you? You know how many times in my career I've made that pitch? Shame on you, cold pitching me like that. What's the matter with you? And I excused myself and I walked directly to the office of the Senate Security Officer without stopping, directly. I went in and I said, I was just pitched by a foreign intelligence officer. He asked me what the story was. I told him what had happened at the lunch. He said, all right, write it up as a memo. I'm going to send it to the FBI. He did that. So 2 days later, 2 FBI agents come to see me, and they said, okay, here's what we want you to do. We want you to call him back, invite him to lunch, and try to get him to tell you exactly what information he wants and how much he's willing to pay for it. I said, okay, I'm a patriot. You want me to wear a wire or something? They said, no, we'll just be at the next table. We'll listen to the whole conversation. I said, terrific. The next week, they called me the day of the lunch, and they said that something had come up. They couldn't be there, but go ahead and do the lunch, write up another memo, and send it to them. So I did. And then they asked me to do it a second time, and a third time, and a fourth time, which I did. And after each lunch, I would write the memo and I would send it to the FBI. We learned in discovery that there was no Japanese diplomat. He was an FBI agent undercover trying to get me to commit real espionage, trying to get me to take money in exchange for classified information. But I kept reporting the meetings back to the FBI. And finally, Peter Strzok, who later became infamous on his own, said, look, he's not going to take the bait. We might as well just end this operation. And they did. So we wanted to declassify all of this evidence of entrapment, in addition to declassifying the fact that I was not guilty on the facts. I was not guilty of the crime for which I was charged, that there was a disgruntled CIA officer named Stephen Kim in Bethesda, Maryland, who had leaked this information, this classified information for which I was charged. Judge Brinkema set aside 2 days for us to argue our motions. We filed 70 separate motions to declassify 70 separate documents, crucial to my defense. On the day of the hearing, we went in and Judge Brinkema said, I'm going to make this easy for everybody. I have decided to deny all 70 of these motions. And my lawyers objected. She overruled them. My lawyers called for something called, I forget what it was called, but what it was effectively was an in-camera interview with the judge. She denied that, but she did agree to an in-camera interview with the prosecutors. When she came out of that meeting, she reiterated her denial of our objection. As we were walking out of the court, I said to my lead attorney, what just happened in there? And he said, we just lost the case. That's what happened. He said, we can't defend you. She won't allow us to defend you. We can't use any of that exculpatory evidence because it's classified. I said, well, now what do we do? He said, now we talk about a plea. Well, the FBI knew that they had me because I was simply unable to defend myself. And they came back and they said, 5 years. I said, forget it. I'll go to trial. They said, you'll lose at trial. I said, I don't care, because if I go to trial, I'm going to testify on my own behalf. And I might accidentally talk about some of the hideous crimes against humanity and war crimes that I've witnessed with my own eyes in 15 years at the CIA. And so they came back and they said, all right, 2.5 years, you do 23 months. Take it or leave it. You have until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. My wife and I stayed up literally all night that night, and we decided to turn it down. I was confident that I had done nothing wrong, and I convinced myself that once I got in front of a jury, they would realize how ridiculous this was, what a miscarriage of justice this was. So I called my attorneys at 7 a.m. and I said, I decided to turn down the deal. I'm going to trial. 2 of the attorneys drove to my house, and the one that I liked and respected the most pulled me aside and angrily said, you know what your problem is? Your problem is you think this is about justice. It's not about justice. It's about mitigating damage. Take the deal. If you were my brother, I would beg you to take the deal. And I realized then, at that moment, then I never had a chance from the beginning. The deck was stacked. When you have the FBI, the CIA, and the Justice Department stacked up against you with an unlimited budget, literally an unlimited budget, and they've already spent $6 million of the taxpayers' money to send you to a low security prison for 23 months, you can't win. Well, that's what this jury consultant told me. If we were in any other district in America, he said, I would tell you, let's go for it. We're going to win this thing. But the Eastern District of Virginia, you don't have a prayer. And so I took the deal. Now, more information has come out in the interim. Actually, since I got home from prison in February of 2015, 2 of those 12 FBI agents have actually called me to apologize and say that this was a political case. They were sorry, but they were forced to do it. We've learned that this was completely and totally at the instigation of John Brennan, because he was livid that I had exposed the CIA's dirty laundry in public, and I had confirmed that the CIA was indeed torturing its prisoners. Remember, John Brennan was the executive director of the CIA at the time. He was the #3 ranking officer at the CIA, and he was in up to his neck in the George W. Bush torture program, which Barack Obama helped to cover up. So I learned a lot. One of the things that I learned is that I'm a whistleblower. You know, the day after my arrest, I sought out Jesselyn Radak at the Government Accountability Project. Jesselyn Radak specializes in the defense of whistleblowers. And I said, listen, I've got to thank you for taking my case. I know that you only take the cases of whistleblowers, and I'm not a whistleblower. And she chuckled and she said, you're the poster boy of whistleblowing. And I said, no, I'm not. I'm just a guy who saw an illegality and said something. And she said, look, there's actually a legal definition of whistleblowing. It's bringing to light any evidence of waste, fraud, abuse, illegality, or threats to the public health or public safety. That's exactly what you did. And she said that in her experience, with the exception at the time of Daniel Ellsberg, and since then also of Ed Snowden, that no whistleblower thinks he's a whistleblower. They have to be told that they're whistleblowers. I've been asked 1,000 times why I did what I did. And I've repeated the same answer 1,000 times. And that is that I have always been a firm and staunch believer in the Constitution and in the rule of law. That's what separates us from every other country. Either we're that shining city on a hill that Ronald Reagan talked about, or we're not. Either we're a beacon of hope for human rights and civil liberties, or we're not. You know, I spent 3 years on assignment at the State Department, at the American Embassy in Manama, Bahrain. And in that job, I was the human rights officer, which meant that I had to write the human rights report every year. It's an annual report mandated by Congress. Now imagine going into the Minister of Interior's office and saying, Your Excellency, you cannot scoop up a 15-year-old kid in front of his school, beat him to death, and then dump his body in front of his parents' house. You cannot kill people extrajudicially. I have to write that in the human rights report. That is a violation of international law. And then 15 minutes later, a CIA officer goes in to meet the same Minister of Interior and says, don't listen to the State Department guy. We'll cover for you. We want you to open a secret prison where we can bring these people that we kidnap overseas that nobody knows about, and then you torture them for us, and then you give us transcripts of everything they say. What do you think they're going to do? You think they're going to listen to the State Department human rights guy? Or you think they're going to cash the CIA's check and do what the CIA station chief tells them to do? We can't be both of those countries. Either we're a nation governed by a living and breathing constitution, or we're not. And I have always believed that we were, and that's worth fighting for. And so, you know, prison was hard. I actually wrote a book about it called Doing Time Like a Spy, How the CIA Taught Me to Survive and Thrive in Prison. It won 2 literary awards, if you can even believe that. But I was serious in my convictions, in my beliefs, that we're the good guys. And if we are going to be the good guys, we have to act like the good guys. The rest of the world looks to us for leadership. And so we have to lead, even if that leadership is sometimes domestically painful. And so with that, we have 19 minutes. I'm happy to take any calls or comments, questions that anybody may have.
Well, that was pretty amazing, I would have to say, and I was curious because I didn't know the actual outcome. What did happen, that you actually had to take the deal in the end. Although just goes to show, like you said, they had a pretty weak case if they kept whittling it down just to get you to say yes to something.
Yes.
Before I kind of open up, I did want to get a couple comments if we can, because Heidi was able to manage to get online here. Heidi, are you there?
Hello, yes, can you hear me?
Hello, yes, thank you, welcome. Wanted to kind of get some commentary on what he had to say and a little bit about kind of your experiences too. And for a quick minute, give a little fast bio on yourself if you would.
Great. John, wow, that's really quite a story.
It was a night.
I'm proud to call you a brother in arms, I guess, in a lot of ways.
Thank you.
A little bio about myself. You want me to start in, huh? Yes.
Jump right in there with both feet.
Okay, great. My name is Heidi Weber. I am a higher education whistleblower in the college or university realm. I was a dean at a for-profit college based out of the Minnesota, Wisconsin area. The school had approximately 25 different campuses under different names and such throughout the United States. So although the majority of them were in the Midwest here. I grew up in South Dakota. My dad was a deputy sheriff when I was younger, and taught me a lot about ethics. I mean, he was a very, very big proponent of ethics, doing the right thing, volunteering for your country, and being a patriot. So he instilled all those things in me, and my mom too. You know, she was right behind him, teaching those things as well. And so I grew up with that in the back of my mind. I started working for this university system, which happens to be a for-profit college university system, and that it's different than a state school or even a private college system where they've been around for, you know, hundreds of years and have a foundation and all those sorts of things in place. For-profit colleges kind of popped up from the 80s until now. Their primary goal is, you know, to be run as a business, and you know, a lot of them do it a great way. They really do. A lot of those for-profit schools are good. They give people a good education. Started seeing all these things going on at the school I was at. I was promoted quickly. I was named faculty member of the year a year after I started. Promoted, moved to the Twin Cities area from South Dakota, and I really started seeing a pattern at that point. You know, before I had just been at a single campus watching all these things go on, and then when I got up here as dean in corporate, I started seeing a pattern at every campus. Well, long story short, my dad had kidney cancer, and he ended up passing away about a year into my being dean at this college. And the school made me leave my dad's funeral and go to an accreditation conference. And I remember thinking that was the longest day of my life. And I had a turning point, became a whistleblower. 4 years later, went to trial, a jury trial, and the verdict was in my favor. Since then, I've done a lot of other things with whistleblowing and become an advocate for especially women whistleblowers. There aren't that many of us. And for others as far as advocacy, because as John knows, it's rough being a whistleblower. The things that you face, the scrutiny is unbelievable. So that's kind of everything in a nutshell. I can get into more detail later, but that's basically where I'm at right now. I'm starting a podcast, and we're going to dive into a lot of different stories and really the meat and potatoes of what it means to be a whistleblower, and go through all of that. So that's where I'm at. Do you want me to keep talking here?
No,
I can go on.
I'm just trying to chime in for a minute. I'm just trying to manage and divvy up the time we've got. So I definitely want to kind of open up for some questions. And so, but the question I would ask of both of you at the beginning, because you're both coming from completely different places, as it were, even though you try to make the same thing happen. Why do you assume that so many people who seeing these sorts of things don't become a whistleblower? What was different about the two of you? Was it just because you had more ethics than everybody else, or you were less fearful of the penalties, or you were more convinced of the fact that you were totally right and there'd be no way you'd pay a price because you knew you were so dead right? What do you think it was?
John, do you want to go first? I'll let you
Sure.
go first here.
Sure,
Thank you. Thank you. This is a question that I've asked 1,000 times. I've asked experts who cover these things, and there's an Israeli journalist who also happens to be a psychologist by the name of Eyal Press. He's actually studied this, and he's written a book about it. And he said that whistleblowers have an unusually well-defined sense of right and wrong, far better defined than the general public. And at the CIA, the culture is such that they teach us that everything is a shade of gray. And I came to realize that just simply wasn't true, that some things are black and white, they're right and wrong. And in my mind, this was something that was just plain wrong. The other thing for me was I grew up in a very close-knit nuclear family. I'm the grandson of immigrants from Greece. The Greek Orthodox Church was very important in my upbringing. And we talk about things like human rights, and so I was raised to believe that on many of these big issues, these broader issues, there's a right and a wrong. And people around me at the CIA spent their time trying to justify their actions that I believe to be illegal. There was no sense in thinking about it. I just knew that it was wrong. And so I think that Eyal Press's conclusion that whistleblowers have this unusually highly defined sense of right and wrong is correct.
Yeah, I would agree. I agree with John. I think, we get into that more in my podcast too, and about talking to that, because as John said, we get that question all the time. And people ask, why did you do that? Or they think we have some ulterior motive or something, along the line of, for money or whatever. In reality, there are 2,000 whistleblower cases filed with the government each year. And whistleblowers save American taxpayers $4 billion are recovered in taxpayer money because of whistleblowers each year. And that's per year, people. So it's 2,000 cases are filed, only 200 or 300 get picked up. So you have all these people who are whistleblowers who obviously did it for the right reason and not for money, because the odds are against you more than they are for you in that realm. Plus, to go through the process, it's a 4 or 5 year process to go through everything, and you have to stay strong and you have to rely on the truth. If you were doing it otherwise, it wouldn't work.
I wouldn't imagine it has to be based on the truth. Before I see some hands are raised, real quick before we base out on asking this question, what can any of us do to either help you individually or at large, for others that are trying to get out there? Is there some organizations to get behind or things of that nature?
I think, well, I can speak to that first here. There are a lot of organizations, but I think if they're just the average person, what I tell people, they look at me and say, you get these things called a traitor, or you're a snitch, or you're a disloyalist, or whatever, and I look at them and say, hey, when is telling the truth wrong? When is that a wrong thing? And then people kind of come around, and I think just telling people, speaking up when people use that kind of narrative or negativity around whistleblowing and whistleblowers will help a lot, because man, we each need that support. It helps us all. It helps every single citizen in this country when we stand up, and if we have support, that would make it all better. You know, more people would be encouraged to do it then. So
What would you say, John?
I would agree with that entirely. If you're interested in organizations, certainly there's the Government Accountability Project, the Project on Government Oversight. There's the WHISPER program, Whistleblower and Source Protection Program is what it stands for. You know, just as a funny aside, when I got home from prison, the Greek government hired me to help them write a new whistleblower protection law. And so I made 10 trips to Greece over the 3 years from 2015 to 2018 to meet with the Minister of Justice and the Minister of State for Anti-Corruption. When I went for the very first time, the Minister of Justice asked me, my Greek is very good, and so the Minister of Justice asked me what I meant when I kept using this word whistleblower, because there's no Greek equivalent of it. So our conversation was in Greek, except for the word whistleblower. So I explained to him in Greek what the meaning of the word was. And he said, oh, you mean like a rat or a snitch? And I said, no, not at all like a rat or a snitch. And so we came up with guardian of the public trust, which sounds really good in Greek. But that's what we're up against. I mean, this was a friendly audience, equating whistleblowing with ratting and snitching. Imagine what a hostile audience is like. And when I say hostile audience, I mean on Capitol Hill, in the oversight committees, in the halls of the CIA and the FBI and the Justice Department. There's a lot of work that needs to be done.
absolutely, that you are 100% right, John. You are. I spoke on Capitol Hill as well, and had faced a lot of questions from the press. Even, you know, the media comes up with that. And I've been on CBS, and I'm a CBS associate producer, and we are in the second season of Whistleblower right now on CBS, which paints whistleblowing in the light that it should be. You know, we're just average people. So
Very nice. Bretann, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, the question for John, what an amazing story. Thank you.
Thank you.
My question is, what you describe seems to be sort of this untouchability. Your experience sort of shows the untouchability of what we call the deep state. And it really does, you know, to normal people seem sort of like this all-powerful entity that no one dare go up against, that you really don't have a chance against. And my question is, what do you have any thoughts or any ideas for those of us who would like to fight that, to sort of either dismantle the deep state or, you know, make it such that we're not up against this all-powerful thing?
Oh, that's a great question. And it's actually a very difficult one to answer. I'll preface an answer by saying that there's a Harvard law professor by the name of Harvey Silverglate who wrote a book in 2012 called 3 Felonies a Day. And he argues that we are so over-criminalized, so over-regulated in this country that the average American on the average day going about his or her normal business commits 3 felonies. With the lesson being, if they want to get you, they're going to get you, and there's nothing you can do to protect yourself. Okay, with that aside, what we have to do is to absolutely ride our members of Congress, our elected officials, because it's their job to provide oversight. It's their job to protect whistleblowers and to make sure that the American taxpayers are being well represented and are not being robbed by the likes of the CIA and NSA and FBI and the rest of the deep state. Those organizations have to follow the law just like every other American does. And it's only Congress that can hold them to it. I'll tell you, really, since 9/11, the oversight committees have not overseen anything. They've just been cheerleader committees. And that's not what Congress is meant to do.
Amen. Amen to that. Kathy, I see you've got your hand up as well. Kathy, are you there? Oh, I've got you muted for a minute.
There we go.
There you go. It was we both. You were muted and I had you muted too by mistake. Go ahead.
That's okay. Thank you, John, for your great integrity on
Thank you.
this. And I'm just thinking, considering what, say, Paul Manafort has been going through, getting sent to Rikers Island just yesterday, and Roger Stone, and all the people involved in the state thing against Trump. Well, I mean, I've heard that they've been told that if you don't agree with this and this, you know, they want them to sing or compose or whatever to tell a story. What kind of advice would you give people caught up in this kind of thing right now?
Oh, be true to yourself. You know, one of the things, the cost of all of this is very, very high, as you might imagine. I lost literally everything. I lost my pension. I lost my home. My wife ran off with her boss. Better than being married to me. I lost everything. I'll never work again. I mean, not really. Not unless some courageous, you know, corporate leader decides to take a chance on a convicted felon. So the cost is very, very high. But I sleep like a baby at night because I know I did the right thing. And my kids are old enough to read articles and to watch documentaries, and my kids know I did the right thing. And so,
Yeah.
you know, if this is what God intended for me, then I'm just gonna have to live with it. But I can tell you that I can sleep at night, and I don't know how some of these other guys sleep at night.
Yeah.
Thank you.
David, I see you've got your hand there.
Thank you, Jeff. John and Heidi, this is David Demarest with Roads to Freedom. And I've noticed that you and Heidi share one thing, and that is you're whistleblowers against large institutions, both government and private. I'm extremely dubious about the government policing itself on issues like this. And for that matter, I'm extremely dubious about large institutions in general, like the education system, private or public, policing themselves. Now, I understand the motivation, the ethical motivation of whistleblowers. What do you think is the problem with large institutions that fosters these types of ethical problems?
Go ahead, Heidi.
Oh, thanks, John. I think John will probably agree with me here in saying that private or government, they're kind of tied together, you know, without getting too political and anything. A lot of our corporations and certain government entities are kind of friends with each other, shall we say, in different ways. And so I think my personal opinion of why this happens is because we don't have competition anymore. We don't have the kind of competition that we need, that kind of checks and balance system that has an equal pushback for bad behavior, you know, or by a few. And certainly a few people cannot represent the entire government or an entire corporation by their behavior. But I think we need things in place that foster more of a balance system between the two so that they are held accountable for what they're doing. And the corporation itself, whether it government or private, can actually hold its own people more accountable inside. But that's my opinion, though.
I hate to sound like an echo chamber, but yeah, I agree completely with Heidi. I can tell you at the CIA, there is actually one good guy, and that's the Inspector General. The Inspector General, when I was there, was a man by the name of John Helgerson. John was already the deputy director of the CIA when I got hired. He didn't retire until 2009, and he was essentially forced out because he refused to cave in to the likes of George Tenet and John Brennan and Jose Rodriguez and these other monsters who created this clearly illegal program. Now, inspectors general do not always work the way they're supposed to work. Tom Drake, who was an NSA officer, went to the Pentagon inspector general to report on a program where NSA was surreptitiously spying on American citizens. And the Pentagon inspector general destroyed the evidence that Tom brought out with him, and then tipped off the Justice Department that Tom had reported on this abuse. So now the DoD Inspector General, now former Inspector General, is under criminal indictment for destruction of evidence. So you can't always trust the Inspector General. And again, this is why we need strong, well-staffed, and well-funded oversight committees who have experienced investigators on them. And there are none. I mean, the Intelligence Committee is supposed to, but they're partisan, and so they don't always cooperate with one another. But this system that we've found ourselves in post 9/11, it's just not workable. There has to be a real change, and at the very least, when it comes to national security, you have to take the partisanship out of it. That's going to be the death of us.
Absolutely.
I would say that's true too. Yes. We're going to try and squeeze one more question before I turn it over to Charles. Jamie, I see you've got your hand up.
Yes. Hi, everyone. John, I think you answered a really big part of my question was, so I lobby here in DC for medical freedom and that. And we're finding that almost every single oversight committee is bought and paid for. Yeah. It is just a mess. Everyone comes in, they're totally bipartisan. They read from their script and they leave. And it is the most unreal, unnatural state. And none of these politicians are making eye contact with anyone. And they bring their people in and they leave. They're not hearing from any sides. Not just from my side of medical freedom. We're finding that, there's people with institutions with about the technology with 5G. They're not hearing it from this side, even on that. I mean, I just wanted to ask you, is there anybody on the Hill that you personally stand behind? And Heidi, you as well, who you felt like you've been in contact for so many years and who you feel comfortable with working with? And and that's it. Thank you, guys.
Great question. The answer is yes, there are two people. Chuck Grassley is the champion of whistleblowers on Capitol Hill, Republican senator from Iowa. And the other is Rand Paul, Republican senator from Kentucky. I've met with both of them. They are wholly, entirely supportive of whistleblowers and have put their own reputations on the line to support people like me or Bradley Birkenfeld or Tom Drake or Bill Binney. They didn't have to do that. And certainly none of the other 536 members of Congress have ever said anything supportive. So yeah, those are the two go-to people that I've dealt with, Grassley and Rand Paul.
That's interesting. Their names have been bandied around. Go ahead, finish your comment.
Oh, sorry about that. Mine are not necessarily within government. I know I've talked to a lot of whistleblowers and a lot of whistleblower attorneys, which are mainly based out of Washington, D.C. There are a lot of them, a lot of those firms really, it's their job, but they're really fighting for recognition of whistleblowers and their rights as well. So I would say Whistleblowers of America is another, and GAP, as John had mentioned before, the Government Accountability Project. They're really doing a lot of lobbying to draw attention. They're great people to talk to that are nonpartisan. I don't want to say bipartisan, nonpartisan maybe, because there's certainly government officials who find it in their best interest at a certain time to bring up or be a champion for whistleblowers, but then when the going gets tough, maybe they're not around, so to speak, from both parties. Both are major parties anyway.
Fair weather friends for sure.
Right.
And one of the other people on the call made a comment, which is so true, is that once all these checks and balances disappear, then who knows where we're going to go. We could drift into fascism, and these big entities like the Fed and the CIA and all the rest of them. There's no taxes paid. They're doing no financial statement. There's no one knows anything what's going on with any of these organizations, let alone the individuals that are passing rules and regulations at willy-nilly and what have you. So it is a disaster we need to get control of. Charles, we're a little past our time here. You want to kind of ask any last question of your own and kind of give us a preview of what's coming up the next couple of weeks?
Well, sure, Jeff. And we've gone to an hour, so let me wrap it up. A quick preview, and thanks, John and Heidi. That's fantastic. I mean, if we don't respect whistleblowers, how can we ever know what's going on in the bowels of the government? So I know, John, you and I spoke a year ago or so about how to expand whistleblower rights to the national security employees. So if you want to say something about that, is that a specific expansion of whistleblower protections that still is needed?
Oh, I think so. I think that there ought to be one focal point on Capitol Hill for whistleblower liaison. Instead of going to the general counsel and then the inspector general and through your chain of command, and then you go to the to the general oversight committee, there should be one person, an ombudsman that you can go directly to and report waste, fraud, abuse, and illegality. We're not there yet. And I'll tell you, things work far better in the Senate than they do in the House. The House is it's a basket case, chaos between the Republicans and the Democrats on the Intelligence Committee. It's unworkable. The Senate is better, but we can be better still.
True. The House Senate Veterans Affairs Committee is meeting on some whistleblower things with witnesses in a couple of weeks. So I'm just throwing that out there in case anybody wants to help out and support them.
And Heidi, how can folks watch your CBS show or your podcast?
You can go to, once it's live, we're talking mid-June here. Right now, season 2 of Whistleblower on CBS is running on Friday nights. It showcases one whistleblower per week, their story, basically like John's story from beginning to end. My story was featured on season 1 as the season finale, but the ones in 2 are pretty good. I've helped find a lot of them, so I've talked to a lot of whistleblowers. Also, my podcast is just diving deeper into it, and it's going to be mid-June, and you go to whistleblowerrevolution.com.
Fantastic. And Jeff, real quick, so next week we have Leonard Reed, the founder of the Foundation for Economic Education, as my son yells at me in the background. And then in 2 weeks, Joe Kent, the Hawaii's think tanker, about how to open up the freight travel lanes with the Jones Act. And then Robert Poole from the Reason Foundation on speeding up the roads. And then a month from now, Adam Kokesh, and whether we'll get bigger issues on the presidential campaign. So with that, Jeff, I'll mute myself.
Okay, very good. Appreciate that, everyone being here today. Obviously we could have kept going here. This was really an exciting episode as usual, and we're going to want to circle back and see how things continue to move forward for all of these issues we've been covering. So I appreciate the two of you making it here today, and everybody else. And I'll see you in a week. And then I said again on Monday I will send a notice out, so we'll have a link to the recording of this as well as announcing Leonard Reed and a little preview of what he's going to be talking about. So thanks all, and pass the word around about us and share some of those videos on our channel. We want to get the viewership.